Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jen. I do cooking, canning, and food preservation videos every Tuesday, and I do vlogs every Friday. If you're into that sort of content, I hope you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. Today we're going to be making some fried green tomatoes. It is that time of year, and I'm going to be completely honest with you when I say I have been dreaming about fried green tomatoes since I decided last year to plant tomatoes this year. So just make sure you wash your tomatoes really well, trim the tops off, the stem end, and then you're going to want to slice your tomatoes about a 1/4 inch thick. You can do them a little thicker than that if you like, 1/2 inch would be fine, but a 1/4 inch seems like just about the perfect size for me. I cannot tell you how many tomatoes that you're going to want to use for this recipe because it depends on how many people you have in your family and how much they happen to like fried green tomatoes. For us, I used like 5 or 6 medium green tomatoes, and that was the perfect amount, and everybody scarfed them up. Now you'll notice that one of my tomatoes there does look a little pink in the middle. It was starting to blush, but it was still mostly green, and that's perfectly fine. If you do not garden, if you're not growing your own tomatoes, check your local grocery store and check your farmer's market this time of year because I have found green tomatoes in Kroger. I'm not even kidding. They were a little expensive, and grocery store tomatoes do kind of taste like disappointment. That being said, once you batter and fry anything, I'd imagine even battered and fried disappointment would still be pretty delicious. So if that's all you have access to, go for it. It's still fine. It's still going to be good. Now, some recipes call for salting the tomatoes and then patting them dry with a paper towel first before you fry them. I find that if you're just doing a flour batter, yeah, you probably need to salt them and pat them dry. But when you're using cornmeal, it is not an issue, the liquid in the tomato. You're not going to have any spattering or popping, and I don't have any problems with the breading falling off. So you can do it either way. It's up to you. So once you get all your tomatoes sliced up, you're going to want to set up your breading station. In the first bowl, I'm just adding some all-purpose flour, however much you think you'll need for the amount of tomatoes that you sliced up. I can't really give you a measurement here. In fact, I ended up having to make some more flour and some more cornmeal throughout the breading process. So you're just going to salt and pepper your flour to taste. Flour doesn't taste like anything, and you want to season the layers of this breading so that you get good flavor all the way through down to the tomato. I'm going to give that a little stir to make sure everything's distributed around. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second station. Now, you can use just milk for this. You can use milk with an egg mixed into it. You can use buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, it's just milk with a couple tablespoons of vinegar in it. I am using kefir. To me, this imparts the same flavor as buttermilk. It was delicious, and it was a good way for me to use up some excess kefir. Now in this third station, I'm using yellow cornmeal. You can use white cornmeal if you like. I just prefer yellow. I already keep yellow cornmeal on hand for making cornbread, so this was just what was easier for me. You're going to want to make sure you season your cornmeal. I'm going to add some dried parsley to this. I don't really have an exact measurement for you, just season with your soul. I'm also going to add some paprika. I'm using smoked paprika for this. I thought it would add a nice flavor since the sauce I was making also had smoked paprika in it. Salt and pepper to taste. Again, just like with the flour, cornmeal doesn't have a whole lot of flavor on its own, so the salt helps brings out the flavor. Give it a good mix. Make sure everything is distributed evenly around the bowl. I had some little chunks of smoked paprika I had to break up. And then once we get this all sorted out, we're going to go ahead and start cooking. So you can do the wet hand, dry hand thing. I always start off that way and it still ends up a mess. So you do you, whatever's easiest. You're going to start by dipping your tomato slices in flour. That helps the buttermilk or whatever you're using as your binder stick to the tomato. And then you're going to dip it into the buttermilk and then into the cornmeal. Now, once you put it in your cornmeal, you kind of want to pack that in. The cornmeal will start to absorb your binder, the buttermilk, kefir, whatever you used, and it makes the nice thick crust on there. And that is why when I fried these, my crust did not fall off my tomatoes. If you pack it on there really well, it just kind of seals that tomato in. So you're just going to repeat the process. I usually do 4 or 5, and then I leave them sitting in the cornmeal plate just for a few minutes. Let that crust kind of, the batter set up so that it's not still super wet when I throw it in. And then while these 4 or 5 are cooking, I'll go ahead and get the next batch ready to go in the oil. So I'm shallow frying these. You only want about a 1/2 inch of oil in a pretty large pan or skillet. And when the oil gets up to about 350 degrees, I kept mine on like medium, low. You don't want to cook these too fast. You'll just burn the cornmeal. So you really have to be patient with this process. They will get crispy. They will be a lovely golden brown, but you have to be patient. You cannot just crank the heat up and expect that cornmeal isn't going to burn, because it will. I'm going to put 5 of these in this pan, and I'm going to leave them alone. I'm not going to touch them or scoot them around or anything. I'm just going to let them sit there until I can see around the edges that crust has started to get nice and brown. Go ahead while I'm waiting and get the next batch ready to go. So when I see that it is crispy around the edges, I go ahead and just use my tongs to give them a flip. Now I'd say at this point they're like probably 85% of the way cooked. You're just going to flip them over long enough to cook that other side and crisp it up. And then I remove them. I like to use a draining rack. If you just throw these on a plate, 9 times out of 10, they're going to get soggy before you get a chance to eat them. I think that the airflow and the excess oil dripping off of them really does help keep them crispy. Because after we ate dinner and I went to go put these all away, they were still crispy, even though they had cooled completely off. And that's it. I'm just going to repeat this process until I've gotten through all of my tomatoes. And like I said earlier, I did end up having to make some more of the cornmeal mixture, and I did have to get some more flour out. I didn't have quite enough to do all of my tomatoes, but that's not a big deal at all. This is a really simple recipe. Now, while I waited for this last batch to cook, I went ahead and made a dipping sauce for this. And this is so simple. I just used some ranch dressing and my homemade Cajun seasoning powder. You can use any of your favorite Cajun seasonings, but if you want to do it like I did, I made my own with 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, a teaspoon of oregano, a teaspoon of thyme, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder, a 1/4 teaspoon cayenne pepper, a 1/4 teaspoon black pepper, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I just mix that up and keep it in a jar for when I need it for things like this, or if I'm making fish. But yeah, it's just ranch dressing and your Cajun seasoning, however much you like, however spicy you want this dip to be. And I would suggest, you can make this a day in advance and let it sit in the fridge, and it's going to be a lot more potent, but this was still a delicious dip. And that's all I have for you this week, friends. I really hope you'll go out and try to find you some green tomatoes and make fried green tomatoes. Every time I make this, it reminds me of my grandmother, and I'd really like you to try it too. Until next time, friends, happy cooking.